You're listening to the Today in Manufacturing podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Today in Manufacturing podcast. With me this week is Jeff Ranke, and filling in for Anna Wells this week, Andy Zoll. How you doing, Andy?
I'm good. How are you guys doing?
It's good. It's
excellent.
Good. Yeah. You know, it's always good to see you again, but it's always like someone's sick. So it's like, I'm so happy you're here, but also, Anna, get better.
Well, last time I was supposed to fill in, I got sick, so this has been a long time coming. I was owed one, so.
Very good. Well, it's good to have you back. Every week, we take the 5 most popular stories on our websites and discuss the implications that they have on the industry going forward. Before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach any of us at Jeff, David, or Andy at IEN.com with email the podcast in the subject line. Also, subscribe to our daily and weekly newsletters, get it delivered to your inbox first, and subscribe to us on YouTube at IEN Magazine so you get a notification when we go live and you can join us for the party. Before we get started, we have a word from our sponsor, Bright Machines.
Manufacturing is long overdue for an overhaul. Transformation will commence in 3. Redesigning for intelligent automation. Deploying software-first solutions. 2. Driving continuous improvement. 1. Flexibility. Scalability. Resilience. Factory transformation complete. Bright Machines. Let the new era of manufacturing begin.
And we're back. And before I do the read, Jeff, I forgot to ask how you're doing.
I am well, David. Thank you. Andy did, so I felt like we'd covered all that.
Oh, okay.
So,
all right.
I think we're good.
Now the read.
There you go.
Okay. Bright Machines is a manufacturing technology company pioneering intelligent, software-defined automation for electronics assembly. It leverages a full-stack approach to fundamentally change the flexibility, scalability, and economics of production. Bright Machines is reimagining how products can be designed and produced to address the realities of today and the future ahead. To learn more, visit brightmachines.com/contact us or just brightmachines.com. I'm sure they're there too. All right. Our first story this week. Scout Motors has $2 billion plan for next-gen EV trucks and SUVs. Another iconic automotive brand is set to reemerge in an EV rebirth. Scout Motors has announced plans to build a $2 billion manufacturing plant in South Carolina. The plant will make next-generation trucks and rugged SUVs inspired by Scout vehicles. These vehicles were made from 1961 to 1980 by International Harvester as a Jeep competitor. The new factory could create more than 4,000 permanent jobs and produce some 200,000 Scouts each year, starting in 2026. While Scout Motors is backed by Volkswagen Group, the vehicles will be designed, engineered, and manufactured in the U.S. for American customers. VW sees Scout as a way to increase profitability and market share in the U.S. And according to Arno Antlitz, CFO of Volkswagen Group, allowing Scout Motors to operate independently is part of a new corporate strategy that empowers these smaller units to act more like a startup, but with access to the car maker's tech platforms. Jeff, I got a couple for you to start. One, it's cool to see something like the Scout come back with that just an old classic design where if you forgot it, when you look it up, you're like, oh yeah, that could do well right now. But the other point I wanted to bring up was how VW is using this new strategy of kind of smaller groups acting independently so they could be more nimble and maybe kind of skip some of that bureaucratic red tape that they'd have if they were inside.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a little bit of that may also be, as odd as this sounds for a brand as strong as Volkswagen, maybe distancing themselves a little bit from that. There's still a lot of fallout from the Dieselgate dynamic.
Yeah.
Plus, you're looking at really a different type of vehicle than what VW is known for.
Mm-hmm.
The Scouts, you got to remember, when they were first produced, we were coming up in this generation that had served in World War II. Jeeps had become so popular because of people's experience during that time period. And they wanted this rugged, off-road vehicle. So when you're back in the woods, you're hunting, you're fishing, you're doing whatever, you had this extra power, but it was also a cool car to be driving on the streets. And that's really what the Scout was about.
Yeah.
And I think if it would have been produced by a traditional vehicle manufacturer, you would have seen them even more popular. I think there was really a lot of grassroots appreciation and desire to they really liked this vehicle.
Yeah.
This vehicle didn't go out of service because there wasn't a demand for it or because it had reliability issues or whatever else. It was basically because the parent company, International Harvester, wasn't a car maker, and they were struggling to make this work from a financial perspective. I'm also nostalgic about this vehicle because I can remember this is the first non-car that my dad had.
Oh, okay.
So I can remember getting in the Scout, I don't know, I must have been somewhere between like 5 and 8.
Yeah.
And it was the whole thing that one of the issues they did have with the Scouts was the rusting.
Oh, okay.
It was definitely known to rust. And I can remember that as well because it was the first vehicle I can remember seeing through the floorboard.
All right.
You know, I think my dad basically got one just for like a get me over for the winter type of vehicle because we lived out near the lake and we were kind of out of town a ways. So it was a good fit, but all of the things that they talk about here, I can actually recall just from the short period of time we had it. Thing is, I think this could really work. Okay, I think this checks a lot of really positive boxes here. It's an electric vehicle, which people are looking for. It's that sort of SUV type of vehicle, but it's got that rugged feel to it. It's got that Jeep feel to it, but it's also got the SUV design dynamic.
Yeah.
So I think there's just a lot of positive things playing off of trends right now on the automotive side of things. This could work. And then when you put VW behind it, from a financial perspective, a design perspective, just an infrastructure perspective, from a manufacturing perspective, a lot of positives here. I thought it was really interesting that they're saying about 200,000 of these a year. During the 19-year run of Scout, just over 500,000 were sold.
Oh, okay.
So definitely scaling up here. I think the price point's really attractive as well. As you can tell, I'm very enthusiastic about this. I really like this. I think this could really go someplace. I'm excited to see these Scouts come out.
Yeah. I think you had the tagline for them already, what the Scout's all about. Come and see what the Scout's all about. Andy, we've talked about it previously, resurrecting some of these brands with a little bit more nostalgia and giving them an EV spin. And I mean, first of all, we got to talk about how Jeff is excited about an EV.
I was waiting for that. I was waiting for that. Yeah.
I mean, I was kind of talking about it. I'm like, you know what's blowing my mind right now is that Jeff is fully on board with an EV. And I think that if Volkswagen or if Scout can get the Jeffs of the EV, periphery on board, you're really onto something.
You're maybe a skeptical car buyer if they can drive them over to the electric side, for sure. We talked about this a little bit off air, which we're not supposed to do.
Yeah, supposed to keep it fresh, but
correct.
Let's regurgitate it.
But I'm sure at some point in my life, I had seen these cars in the 80s, maybe the early 90s, if some were still hanging out there. And I just blanked on them. So I got to discover this car brand this morning while preparing for this podcast. So, I mean, they're great. Even by the standards of weird 70s cars, they're great. So the new ones look good too. They're updated, but you can definitely tell that they were inspired by this. Not unlike another brand I want to talk about here, Rivian. Because that's another car that's obviously been inspired by those kind of retro SUV truck type designs. And I think it's almost like you want to root for this to work, kind of like Rivian, because if you see Rivians out there, you're like, that's a great looking car.
Yeah.
And also it's electric. So it'll help get some of those gas guzzlers off the road in favor of an electric vehicle.
Yeah. Every time I pass a Rivian, I always think, man, what is that?
Every time.
And it's always a Rivian. Like it definitely, you're right. It has that sort of it factor that really stands out among
Rivian and the new Bronco, I think, definitely are inspired by these kind of older SUVs. But I think Rivian could also be sort of a word of caution here, because we kind of said the same thing about them. They were backed by Ford and Amazon, and we said, well, they'll be fine. They have this great product, and they're backed by these huge companies. And they've, as documented here many times, they've struggled out of the gate through factors beyond their control and some in their control. So even though VW is behind this, Scout is operating with some autonomy, and they've got to be careful not to get out over their skis a little bit, I think.
It's still going to be difficult.
Yeah.
And I mean, you bring up the Bronco. there is just this resurgence of the one thing I thought about the Bronco is that it got a little too far away from that old boxier design.
Yep.
You know, there was actually when they first kind of teased that Bronco, it was in that cinematic classic Rampage with The Rock. And I was like, whoa, if that's what the new Bronco looks like, I'm going to buy one now. And then they came out with a slight redesign. You're like, oh no, they've rounded the edges.
And I think that is one of the caveats here. For this to be successful, it does have to have that rugged element to it. You need to be able to take this vehicle off-road and through the creeks and through the streams and over the rocks and all that good stuff, because that is the lineage of what the Scout was. So
well, and it that was one thing that it introduced me to, is that they really made a point of stressing that this is an R SUV, a rugged SUV, not just, you know, your grocery getter, I guess, for lack of a better term. And to your point about the Scout with the hole in the, in the floor, it did remind me of my old Jeep that had a similar issue with holes in the paneling. And you know, I thought it gave it character. And then once we had kids, Carrie's just like, a baby's gonna fall through that. So,
It's like a glass bottom boat, but for the highway.
yeah.
I should put the caveat, there were not gaping holes.
Yeah.
My parents were not putting me that at danger.
Small.
I mean, it was a different time. You
Yeah.
know, we weren't too concerned about seatbelts and things, but just being able to see, I thought it was cool as a kid. Like, that's the road.
So a lot of this comes from a Volkswagen subsidiary called, I think, the Triton Group, which is a commercial vehicle manufacturer that acquired the Scout name in 2021 when it acquired Navistar for nearly $4 billion. Now, Navistar is known more for commercial trucks, buses, and engines. You might know International Trucks, IC Bus, which is more than a third of the buses that you see in North America. You kind of never know, though, what's going to emerge from an acquisition. Like, I can't imagine that they're buying Navistar, and they're like, oh, no, the Scout brand. This is why we're doing it. I mean, someone probably found it in a file, and they're just like, we own this? Yeah, all right. You know, I mean, maybe somebody that it was a passion project for them. So I want to just, as I said, another opportunity to bring an EV, to bring an old classic back into an EV life. And so the Gremlin, which was owned by American Motors Corporation, AMC, then renamed Jeep Eagle, merged into Chrysler in 1990, and so Stellantis probably owns the Gremlin IP. I'm just saying there's a real opportunity there, Stellantis, to give me an EV Gremlin.
Do you see a lot of people, because the Scouts, actually, those are collectible. People put money into restoring them, running them. My brother-in-law actually has a super cool one that he's worked on.
Yeah.
I don't see the Gremlin movement.
There is
coming to the forefront
they're
here.
actually starting in, the pandemic birthed a lot of new hobbies. And during the pandemic, people started fixing up Gremlins.
Come on.
So, no, seriously, like, there was this resurgence in 19 and 20 where, like, a little bit of fanfare behind the Gremlin. And they even there have been a couple of designers that are using AI to take legacy works and design them as a new release. And one of them that received a lot of, kind of went viral online, was a Gremlin Hellcat. So I'm just saying the opportunity
So that's
is there,
a hot
Stellantis.
rod then.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not a Gremlin.
No. I mean, that's just an example of how, like, it's part of this resurgence. And, a
Not
Gremlin
buying
EV.
this. Not buying this. Even
Nostalgia is a
bit.
powerful drug.
It is, man.
Have you ever been in a Gremlin?
I can't say that I
No,
have, but
I
those I remember. I don't remember the Scout. I do remember the Gremlin.
Terrible.
If you're in the Midwest, I'll come to you to ride in a Gremlin.
I'd 100% buy an electric Gremlin.
You guys are ridiculous. I'm gonna drive over your Gremlin with my electric Scout.
That's right. Millennials, right? I can't wait until
I'm gonna park my Scout on top of your Gremlins.
That sounds great.
It'll clear it. It'll be fine.
If in 4 years that these are coming out, if in 4 years we all come into work and park next to each other and it's Gremlin, Scout, Gremlin, I think we're all going to be in a better place.
No, I'm actually gonna park on top. That's how much I hate the Gremlin idea.
Very good. Well, our next most popular story this week, Rolls-Royce testing B-52 replacement engines. Rolls-Royce has begun testing replacement engines for the Air Force's B-52 fleet. The Air Force picked the company's F-130 engines and ordered more than 600 of them. Rolls-Royce is testing the engines at a NASA facility in Mississippi. The F-130 engines are derived from Rolls-Royce's BR family of engines, but are more durable. One feature that they say can be beneficial is that it'll stay on wing for the duration of the B-52 lifespan, which could reduce maintenance costs and allow the B-52 fleet to keep going for decades. The engines will be manufactured at the company's facilities in Indianapolis. The Air Force in 2021 awarded the $2.6 billion contract for the engines, which are replacing the TF-33 PW-103, manufactured by Pratt & Whitney, which have powered the B-52 since the 1960s, but are said to be obsolete, or not necessarily obsolete, but they're not going to be serviceable by 2030. Jeff, I was first and foremost really struck with how popular this wound up being across our websites. Normally this is one of those stories that we put together as a video, and you're just like, man, I wish more people checked it out. But everyone checked it out because it is a really interesting new engine, huge contract, and a lot of jobs all kind of based in Indianapolis to make this happen.
Yeah. Really interesting when you look at the legacy of the B-52, and I know Andy's going to touch on that, so I don't want to go too much, but this was a plane that was delivered. The last time they delivered a B-52 was in like 1962 or something like that. Mm-hmm. The cost was $14.5 million. These things are still flying.
Yeah.
Now, there's been a lot of money poured into retrofits and all that kind of stuff, but when you look at this $5 or $6 billion contract,
mm-hmm.
if you look at that versus the potential cost of a new plane in today's dollar for this fleet of planes, this would be like $156 billion to replace them. So pretty smart investment here in terms of upgrading the engines. The other thing that I would think is really interesting here is I think this is the second story in a row, or the second week in a row, we've had a story talking about upgrades to military jets that really have a very specific military dynamic to them or an objective to them. They're really focused on the current strategic plan, which is dealing with China. Okay, I think this is what this is all about. These new engines are made to, they have longer range. Mm-hmm. That's the biggest benefit that they offer. So when you look at the nearest place, and again, we're looking at a B-52 bomber here. These are not planes or jets that can go off of a carrier. Mm-hmm. You need an actual landing strip.
Yeah.
Like a 2.5 mile landing strip for these planes to take off and land. So the closest strategic partner we would have to China is Australia. Mm. That's a 9-hour flight.
Yeah.
Okay. Now there are some islands there that might possibly also work out, but right now, as we currently sit, if we were in that type of conflict, we'd be looking at Australia. So you need an engine that can make that flight.
Yeah.
That's what's really interesting here. Just like we saw last week with the F-18 kind of going out of style for the FXX, that a lot of that, again, was focused on we need more range so we can get to China and back if we need to.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of this comes into play too. So a lot of interesting dynamics. Again, the longevity of this B-52 is incredible.
No, when you talk about the longevity, one of the facts that they kind of threw out there was that the B-52 entered service in 1955, and grandchildren of the original pilots could be flying them still today. And for the, whatever they say, like next 30 years. Andy, this gave me a look into, the Air Force fleet, which, I'm not well versed in. I don't think you are either.
I am not.
But I mean, anytime we get a glimpse as to the inner workings of it, I'm always fascinated by, particularly a project that actually had cost savings that Jeff had mentioned, which is a surprise for the military complex.
Always a good move.
Yeah. But what were your thoughts on this new engine, and maybe any thoughts about Pratt & Whitney kind of losing that business and it going to Rolls-Royce?
It's kind of a crapshoot with these stories, as we talked about a little bit, whether they'll do it or not. It seems like the B-52, that's just this universally known commodity, and then anything that happens with that's been flying for decades, I think that's bound to draw interest. So this just appears like it's just Rolls-Royce just kind of providing an update here. So it's not, on one hand, it's not terribly newsworthy, but also this is really interesting just from a national security context and in the engineering context of this plane.
Well, and just flat cool.
Correct.
You watch the video of the test. And you're okay, I can get on board with this.
So it sounds like from these initial reports that their initial testing's going well. There's still a long way to go, so we'll have to see whether they provide, how many updates they provide as that process moves forward. And we touched on this a little bit too. I know it's been these planes have been overhauled so much that it's debatable whether they're still the same plane, but it's still the same airframe since the Cold War, just after World War II. And these new engines will take them to the end of those airframes' shelf life, which is about 30 years from now.
Right.
So, I mean, by that time, some will be 100 years old. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah. Probably better than expected.
You would think so.
Yeah.
I don't know what their projections were during the Eisenhower administration, but I will be curious to see. And I would hope they're already planning for the end of that airframe's shelf life, because it'll be interesting to see what happens in 2055 when they're going to still need these long range bombers, and they'll need to have entirely new planes. So we'll have to see what happens there. But for now, this was really interesting to look at.
A lot of this came down to cost. And the B-52 Strato Fortress is the Air Force's sixth most expensive plane to operate. It costs more than $70,000 per flying hour to maintain this thing. And I'm like, okay, so that's sixth. What's the most expensive one? That's the E-4 Nightwatch, which is what's used for the National Emergency Airborne Command Post. So if everything is real bad, and we need the command center in the sky, that costs about $160,000 per hour to fly.
Not a surprise, because if there's all that electronics on there that you have to keep cool, granted you're higher up, so maybe the elevation the altitude would help with that. But yeah, I mean, it would make sense that would be the most expensive.
Yeah,
I guess
you could have named any number for a flying White House,
Yeah,
it would have been okay.
So there's 76 of these still in service. There are 12 of them in reserve. And like you said, Andy, I mean, they could serve for another 30 years before this airframe becomes too fatigued. I mean, one thing that we really didn't touch on is a real testament to the engineering. And I mean, maybe it's because so many things in our modern culture is planned obsolescence and, built to fail eventually, that you see something like this and it's a true feat of engineering and should be, applauded.
And yeah, and I know this is going to sound sort of backhanded, but Boeing made these.
Yeah.
Boeing's been under a lot of fire lately for some of the issues that they've had. Boeing can build a good plane, okay? They've got some legacy here, so something they can hang their hat on.
Yes, 100-year-old hat. No, I tell you what, things are going bad now, but 100 years ago.
We used to be pretty good at this.
Hey, they just set the world record for longest flight of a paper airplane. There's something
Blocking
there.
and tackling, David.
Something there.
Blocking and tackling. Start with the simple stuff.
As I had mentioned, they're replacing a Pratt and Whitney engine. Rolls-Royce really fought hard to win this contract. The company has invested more than $600 million in Indianapolis to create one of the most advanced engine manufacturing sites in the United States. On top of that, Rolls-Royce North America adds about $8.6 billion to the U.S. economy every year. So a real windfall.
Well, we just did that big story about that big testing facility that they have too, that they've put a ton of money into, and that's for hybrid engines, correct?
I believe so, yeah. All right, our next most popular story. Musk's fully electric transportation future has one exception. At Tesla's recent Investor Day, CEO Elon Musk provided a glimpse into where Tesla is heading and what the future of electric transportation holds. Musk laid out his company's, quote, master plan. Technically, this is Master Plan 3, which includes a new gigafactory in Monterrey, Mexico. Tesla says the plant could help raise production across all of the company's facilities to a combined 3.5 million vehicles per year. The Mexico plant will be built to handle production for Tesla's upcoming lower-cost model. Tesla plans to cut prices in half with the help of new manufacturing techniques. So a brand new Tesla could start at about $25,000. Musk then made some other predictions, like full sustainable energy on Earth by 2050. Such a feat would require 240 terawatt hours of energy storage and 30 terawatt hours of renewable power generation, which Musk says would all cost about $10 trillion of investment. To make that happen, it's also going to take about 0.2% of the world's land area to be used for solar and wind power infrastructure. Musk remains confident that all cars will eventually be electric and autonomous, and he said internal combustion engine vehicles, quote, will soon be viewed as with the same disdain as the horse and buggy. Jeff, there are a couple points here. One, that we could have just really, Tesla could have really hung its hat on a win in terms of the new plant in Mexico and cutting costs in half. And that would have been the story. And then he's like, but here's the future as Elon Musk sees it. And I feel like maybe that grinded a few gears.
Are you sure you want to start with me on this one?
I mean, yeah. Yeah, you've been overly sunny for this episode, so I really wanted to bring you back down to,
This guy. Where does he get these numbers from, first of all? I mean, when he pulls this stuff out, first of all, the one quote in there, too, you could support a civilization much bigger than Earth. And I'm just shocked and surprised how few people realize this. Mm-hmm. Yeah, man, it's possible, but it's just not realistic right now. And when he throws this stuff out there like, hey, it's not that hard, and it's only going to cost $10 trillion, what's the big deal?
Yeah.
We haven't figured out how to do this right yet. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
The other thing is, this is the guy talking about all these sustainable energy initiatives, and Tesla has a reputation within that environmental sustainability. Was it the ESG, environmental safety?
Environment, social governance.
Thank you, Andy. They are the least transparent auto manufacturer when it comes to their carbon footprint. Everything they talk about is about their vehicles, not about their manufacturing processes. They do have this huge solar array on that gigabyte factory in Nevada. They don't say anything about how much energy it puts out. And the reason that really grinds my gears is because he's talking about how easy it is to get all of this renewable energy going so we don't have to worry about fossil fuels. And he can't demonstrate in his own facility how to make it work.
Yeah.
If it was working, I'm pretty sure we would know about it in terms of covering their energy needs. It's obviously not, and that's not his fault, okay? But if you're going to stand up there and beat your chest about this isn't that hard, this is the only way, this is all we got to do, you're trying it and you can't make it work. So, how don't we talk more realistically here?
Yeah.
Because in that I could probably let go, but then he makes some of these other statements at this investor day where he's talking about they're going to be producing 20 million EVs by 2030.
It's a lot.
Do you know how many vehicles Toyota, the largest OEM, makes per year?
I don't.
10 and a half.
Well, I mean,
That's
obviously.
all that they make.
Yeah.
All of them. All of them. Do you know how many vehicles Tesla made last year?
200,000.
1.3 million.
I was wrong.
So they need to grow by 15 times their output in the next 7+ years.
He is
7
a
years,
bold
6+
man.
years.
Yeah.
Come on, give us something. And what's maddening is, in addition to that, they come out with one of the things that should have been the lead of all of this was that they have come out with a new drive that isn't going to need any rare earth elements. That's what you need to lead with, because what's the big issue right now is figuring out where we're going to get all this stuff, reducing mining issues and all of the complications that are surrounding that. So if you've got this drive where you don't need rare earth stuff, and then you've got this lithium processing plant that you're also going to have in the U.S., which is huge, talk about those things.
Yeah.
Don't start just going off on these ridiculous projections on what you're going to be putting out, and then talk about, we're going to do all this renewable energy stuff, so by 2050, we don't need to worry about That's not realistic. Maybe that's what you want to do. Maybe that's what all the numbers say we need to do. We're not there yet. And again, you've got this stuff at your own facilities, and if it was working, you would tell us.
Yeah.
But you're not even disclosing any of those numbers. This drove me nuts because this guy has some amazing ideas and concepts, and he's done so much. I just wish he would listen to people, or I wish there was somebody who could be in his ear saying, hey, man, talk about this stuff when you're in front of other human beings.
Yeah.
If you just contain your crazy to when you're back at the office.
Yeah. I mean, he's just out there and he gets on a roll and he's like, and you know what? And then we're going to space. It can get off the rails pretty quick. I think you're right when it comes to the drive with the rare, not using any rare earth materials, because, when he joked about getting into mining, maybe he looked into getting into mining and he's like, turns out I don't want to get into mining. Yeah. The other part, when you talk about talking about how they possibly use solar power as part of their advanced manufacturing techniques, maybe that's part of the secret sauce that's going to help them bring down the cost over, down to a $25,000 price point. And so maybe they don't talk about that because, it's part of what's going to be a real differentiator. I don't know.
Okay, but here's the other thing. The $25,000 starting point, that's great. It's a starting point.
Yeah.
If you look at Teslas, if you put stuff like, I don't know, a radio in there, that all of those things go up real quick. To get to an actual vehicle that is comparable to what you drive on the road, it's going to be a heck of a lot more than 25 grand.
I don't know. I'm really interested to see, and this is kind of a price point where it becomes almost a no doubter to me. Andy, one of the things that struck me other than the price point was how sometimes when Musk gets on a roll like this, he really comes off as like the pseudo intellectual at a party.
I can't think of anyone who has done more to erode any potential benefit of the doubt in 6 months' time. I just can't conceive of anyone who has done worse in that regard. Before I get to some of the more outlandish stuff from this investor day, I think it's worth noting that while they talk about new manufacturing techniques, I suspect what will also help bring the price point down is the reason every other automaker has a plant in Mexico, and that's labor costs. So I think it's worth pointing that out. Secondly, a lot of this seems far-fetched, and a lot of it probably is. But there's a couple things in here that I think are important to point out that aren't necessarily just kind of off the wall, plucked out of nowhere. One is that the idea that we could power the Earth with solar power with probably less infrastructure than you might think, that's not him just making. Well, he might just be making it up, but it's backed up elsewhere. There's a study
to a point.
Correct. There's a study in 2021 that found that the number of putting solar panels on half of the world's roofs could meet its entire electrical demand. Now that's a ton, but when you're thinking about the world's entire energy demand, that can seem like an insurmountable amount. And while it's hard to get there, it's not impossible.
Yeah, I think maybe that's why he used the 0.2% of the world's land area rather than when you start saying half of the roofs in the world.
Yes,
it's just like, wow,
that's a big number. 0.2 is a smaller, or 0.02, whatever it was. The other thing is the 2050 target. And again, I don't know where he got that number from, but that also, coincidentally or not, happens to be the number from the Paris Climate Accord, which is the goal to get to net zero emissions by 2050 in order to stave off the worst effects of global warming. So that is actually, I don't know if it's a feasible target, but we should do our best to make it a realistic target, whether we'll get there or not. So just those two things. The other stuff, electric aircraft, that seems a little more far-fetched to me.
But as Dan Harold, who's watching us live, Dan, thank you for joining us, says it's a master plan. So it doesn't necessarily need to be accomplished by Tesla alone. And he kind of brings up a point that we bring up a lot, like that Elon has made a lot happen. Sometimes maybe he should be afforded a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt as a result of his previous accomplishments. But kind of to Andy's point, in the last 6 months, I think that's when he's kind of chipped away at that.
But the thing is, he's hurting his message when he makes these claims. Now, I agree with Dan. He has accomplished a tremendous amount, and I'll give him credit for all that all day. But he loses people in the hubris of everything when he says it with such hubris and such arrogance. Like, this isn't that hard, guys. Let's just do this. No, the way it needs to be expressed is, we can do this. Here is the plan, and here's how we're going to help make this happen. You play a part too by putting solar panels on your roof or whatever the case is, and then lead into the solutions you offer as a company and how that all fits together. Again, it's the way he presents this stuff, and he just wants to be the smartest guy in the room so everybody can go, he wants everybody to just go, well, Elon said it, so it must be sweet, it must be good. Yeah. When the reality is, he invites question. He invites criticism because of the way he presents his information. Yeah. That's what I get frustrated because it's right there. He does have it.
Yeah, he has it, and if he just changes tone and messaging, he could rally people around him rather than, making people scoff at some of his claims.
He could have been the guy who single-handedly made electric vehicles viable. Yeah. Almost single-handedly. Yeah. And still, he's just eroded it. He just has. Yeah.
I want to go back to this $25,000 price point because right now the average for electric vehicles is $58,000. So that's an incredible difference. And I've talked about being kind of in wait and see mode when it comes to EVs for personal use. Even if it's starting at $25,000 and I got to pay another $1,000 to get my AM radio, we're still pretty a lot lower than that $68,000 price point. one of the things that also struck me was that this master plan just really derailed any heat that he generated with that Mexican plant and the cheap car. Normally after these investor days, you see a little bit of a bump in the stock. It actually went down a bit after investor day as a result of some of these claims. And he really could have, think of the previous presentations that he has had, right? He showed just that slapdash Cybertruck where he like shattered the window and like, just short of like the panels falling off, like, but he wheeled something out there to be like, this is where we're going, look at it. And maybe it was, that or the Optimus, the humanoid robot that kind of came out, couldn't really walk, almost fell over, but like he could have had anything just pushed out there like, hey, give me the earliest prototype, the earliest concept of what this car might look like. And it would have been an entirely different message. And I think it would have been an entirely different response to Tesla from the market. I'm also constantly amazed by how many people are like Elon Musk anti-government homers until it comes to green energy. And then when it comes to green energy, it's like, whoa. Solar and wind are just not going to work. But the same guy that you've championed for doing everything else as like this anti-government man who should just be like clung to, once he starts talking about green energy, everybody's like, whoa, pump the brakes here. It's not possible. And we saw it a lot online.
Everybody hears what they want to hear,
Yeah, very selective. All right, now on to something of grand importance. Our next most popular story on beer recalled for excessive alcohol. Your Mate's Brewing Company out of Australia had to recall its watermelon sour beer for excessive alcohol. The cans had to be pulled after undergoing secondary fermentation, which, if you can pick up from the name, refers to any fermentation that occurs after active primary fermentation. Food Standards Australia, their FDA, warned that consuming the beer could cause illness and urged customers to safely dispose of it. Oh, and Andy, there's the other little caveat at the end there. The excessive fermentation can also cause too much carbonation, making it dangerous to even open the cans. So it was a story that went from fun to awesome to a little bit scary. And despite how many people sort of read that fine print, like maybe the cans could explode, there's a lot of traction on social media, people trying to get their hands on these.
Yeah, don't shake those while you're grabbing it out of the fridge. In particular,
this is not the one to shotgun.
Correct. So the reports on this story out of Australia, basically their food safety agency said that too much or fermentation or alcohol or whatever could cause illness/injury is how they put it. Now, as we have established, too much pressure in the cans, that poses obvious safety problems. But I'm not quite clear on what the illness issue potentially could be besides
hangover,
being too intoxicated, and that's, it's easy to make jokes about, but as anyone who's made a bad assumption about a beer's alcohol by volume before will tell you, it's not to be taken lightly after a few. I don't know if that's happened to you, gentlemen, personally. Personally, it has absolutely happened to me.
Yeah, no, I've had some strong gins in my past.
Mm-hmm. The old, this is nice, and then you figure out it's 10%.
Yeah, like the bourbon barrel beers, those are definitely ones that catch me.
Yep. Or when you don't realize the box of wine is a box of wine and not like a beer. Also, I'll have to cite Anna for this one. She pointed out that this brewery has gone from startup to $18 million in sales in 4 years and is now expanding again. So, as with any industry, when you're growing that quickly, things can get overwhelming, and if you're not careful, you can lose sight of the details. So that could be an issue here too.
That is some incredible growth. And Jeff, I don't want to poke fun too much at it because, it could be dangerous, so you want to get them off the shelf. But in terms of a scandal, if you want to call it that, sure, it's a product recall, but this is a product recall that might wind up doing more beneficially for the company because the exposure has been, Jimmy Fallon was joking about it.
Oh, really?
They've just had a lot of mainstream heat as a result of this. And sometimes, kind of similar to what we were talking about with the golden beers, sometimes it can be almost a happy accident that might, in the long run, wind up benefiting the company.
Yeah, and they did respond pretty quickly to it. And it wasn't a huge quantity either. According to what I saw, it was about 30 16 packs of beer. So I think on their end, yeah, they did get a lot of positive notoriety. A couple of questions I have is, why in the world are you making a watermelon beer? What is that?
I mean,
what is with the fruit in the beer?
Gen Z
Am I sounding like a grumpy old man here?
Maybe. Just don't say like, all I need is my Busch Light and I'm fine.
Oh, Busch Light's terrible.
Okay.
But yeah, so the one thing that was pretty cool though too, I do love the Australian vernacular here.
Oh, yeah.
Went to their site. I do want to go to this place now just so I can order either a pot, a schooner, or a jug of beer.
Yeah.
That just sounds fantastic. And if you need to take it with you, in addition to just getting a can, a 4-pack or a 16-pack, you can get a squealer or a growler to go.
What's a squealer?
A squealer is a little bit less than a growler.
Oh, okay. Okay. I mean, if we're talking about Australian slang, the one that caught me was that they don't call it a can of beer. They call it a tinny.
A tinny.
Yeah.
They got it right.
Yeah.
I mean, how can you not be happy saying I want a tinny of beer?
Yeah. Actually, I took that from their statement where it's just like, mates, unfortunately, we've had an issue with some of the tinnies from our recently released watermelon sour. And it's just, when it comes to a company copping to a recall, that is the most pleasant one I've ever read. Just
Absolutely.
Very apologetic.
Yeah, I tell you
friendly.
what, friends, our bad,
I mean, I've seen a lot of these sites for these like craft breweries here in the U.S. These guys nail it. Like they really do a great job promoting and merchandising their line of beers here. I want to go.
And it was, what did you say, like 34 packs or something like that?
They do 16 packs, which is again a little different than what we do here. And there was 30 of them that they had to recall. So yeah, not a ton.
And it only happened in a few unrefrigerated cans, but they're still taking it seriously. Because again, you don't want them blowing up.
Yeah.
I mean, also just keep them refrigerated and you should be fine. I don't know. It's
Has there been like a rush to get these now? Like people trying to find them instead of
on every one of their statements on social media when they were trying to update people about the recall, everyone else is just like, I got a home for you if you're looking for them, and like, or just like, hey, if you need to get rid of some of them, just like reach out to me and I'll take them off your hands. So there was definitely the obvious side of this where everyone's just like, how do I get my hands?
Everybody's got jokes.
Oh yeah.
So am I missing something here with a watermelon beer? Do I need to expand my?
You're not a sour beer guy?
I don't see the need to put fruit in beer. It's beer. It's already good enough. Why are you putting fruit in it?
I'm not much of a sour guy. I do like watermelon though, so you never know.
David, you're not a beer guy, but would you try watermelon beer?
No, because it's beer and all beer is gross. But I will say that to that, I do constantly try when people, when the beer drinkers in my, circle of friends say like, okay, you have to try this. This is amazing. I'll still try it and be like, nope, still beer. So, I mean, to that, I would say it's always worth trying new things. But I mean, every once in a while, you're going to try it and just be like, no, that's just a fruity beer that I don't need. I mean, it's right up there with, we went to sort of a high-end bar after our unfortunate loss in the dodgeball playoffs this year. And the drink, they handed me the drink menu and it was like a full side of mocktails. I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't know if you're looking at me, but I'm a sweating man in sweatpants and an old grease shirt, and I'm looking for something not mocktail.
Not mocktail.
Yeah. But I mean, tastes are changing. The mocktail market, for as much as we mocked it, is emerging and doing really well. Like the NA.
Right.
So I don't know. People want to try something different. Now, sticking with alcohol, our most popular story this week. Jack Daniels ordered to halt project over whiskey fungus. Whiskey Fungus recently shut down construction on a new Jack Daniels warehouse in Tennessee. Residents of Lincoln County say their homes, cars, and trees have become encrusted by a dark fungus. The culprit is a series of local barrel houses operated by Old Number 7. The fungus isn't dangerous, and it feeds on ethanol vapors. It has a history of impacting areas around distilleries as well as those around bakeries. Really, the biggest reason for the shutdown appears to be a permitting issue, and the company will need to obtain all necessary permits before the project can resume. Some residents want the whiskey maker to add filters to the facility, But the company warns that these air filters could change the taste of the whiskey during the aging process. Jeff, so we went from beer, where it's a hard no for me, to whiskey, which I welcome with open arms. But I see whiskey fungus, and I'm like, is this something I have? It seems like something that could actually be quite a nuisance for the community around these facilities.
Yeah, I think this, whether it's Jack Daniel's or any other whiskey distiller, has done a good job of talking about the angel's share, right? That amount that evaporates out, and it kind of has this, almost majestic, higher level type of treatment of their product.
Poetic.
I'm unfamiliar.
Yeah.
What is the angel's share?
That
I'm
is
not
what-
familiar with that.
When you're distilling in these barrels, that's what evaporates. That's the alcohol that evaporates, and that ethanol is that creates the fungus, is what's clinging to everything. So it's where it emanates from, that evaporation process.
And they've promoted this previously.
Yeah, it's kind of been part of how they've romanticized a little bit of their process.
I can't remember which brand it was, but they basically squeezed more booze out of the barrels afterward and called that Angel's Share or something like that.
Yeah,
or
I remember.
Devil's Cut, that's what it was. I can't remember the brand.
Okay.
So, but it's a real thing. And although there isn't any proven health issues, this is damaging property at a huge level. I mean, this is causing homeowners to repair siding more frequently. Other businesses are having issues with just their property values. So it is a huge issue. Now, it seems like there should be a solution, and I'll circle back to that in a second. One of the things you have to sort of appreciate, or at least take into perspective, is we're looking at Lincoln County here in Tennessee. Now, this is a county of roughly 35,000 people. The number one industry is agriculture. So when we get into some of the paperwork issues that they're dealing with, it's basically zoning this land, moving it from ag to industrial. Okay, because that is the primary focus of everybody in this very small county. Now, the way I understand it, and it's a little bit unclear in terms of how many are actually operating now and how many they want to operate in the county. I think right now there's 3. They want to get to 6. So obviously double. I'm not great at math, but I'm pretty sure that's a doubling. And for a county this small, when you're looking at tax revenues going from $150,000 to $300,000 a year, that's a big deal.
Yeah,
that's a lot of school books. That's a lot of road patching. That's a lot. So you can see why Lincoln's like, can we live with this? Can we kind of figure out a way to make this work? Because we'd really like Jack Daniel's to keep putting these big distillery or these barrel houses in our backyard. It's helping out our community potentially just through that tax revenue. So you can appreciate that. There has to be a solution here, because with a lot of the industrial like air scrubbers and things like that, what it works on is all the bad air stays within the facility. You clean it up before it goes out.
Yeah.
Okay. What it would seem like it would seem in order to not affect the product, you can just have something at the point of release.
Right.
There has to be something that can be done there, so you're not bringing any of that air back in to treat it within the facility, which could impact the product, but still fix it before it goes out the window.
Yeah.
It just seems like there's too much positive here to not come up with a very practical solution long term.
No, and Andy, I was surprised that, first of all, whiskey fungus is gross. I mean, I don't know if we can have photos from the photos and videos from the video that we put together, but when I was looking at it, it reminded me of like a mix of soot. It looked like a fire had gone through town.
Just trees coated black.
Yeah, like I was calling them tree barnacles because it's what it reminded me of. It's but that aside from all the property values, stuff like that, at the end of the day, they just didn't do the right paperwork.
No, this wasn't stopped because it was, it appeared to be contaminating the land. It was because nobody could find site plans or building permits filed with the county. So a local resident, a neighbor who runs an events business, obviously doesn't want to spend all their time power washing their walls,
Right.
which is, half effective anyway against this stuff.
Yeah.
Just basically had an attorney file suit and say you haven't done this right. Now, Jack Daniel's says they followed all proper regulations. There was supposed to be some sort of issue where they were grandfathered in by the county or local leader. But there's not, you say there has to be some sort of resolution, but it certainly is not there now because
They don't
the company
have to.
the company is digging in, and this is just it's making the residents' lives miserable, and they're missing out on investment. So I don't know what the way out of this is.
It's for the events business. I imagine that they probably do a share of weddings.
Oh, for sure.
And unless you get that right couple that wants more of a rustic look, they're going to probably not care for everything being covered in black.
I completely empathize.
Yeah.
It's their livelihood too.
Well, and you talk about how there were no there hasn't been sufficient evidence to correlate any health risks with this distillery fungus. But then in the next paragraph, the authorities stress that if you are going to remove it from any surface, you make sure you use PPE, use N95 masks, goggles, and gloves. It's perfectly safe. Don't touch it. Don't breathe it.
Don't mind us while we cover our bases here.
Yeah. So, and talking about how it's difficult to remove, that is a real issue for homeowners because we power washed our house last year, just the normal kind of from dirt and other debris, stuff like that. And that alone is a pain. And it doesn't all come off. So I can't imagine that there's a perfect solution where, they just give everybody in town a power washer and call it square.
No. I'd agree. Another thing I was going to add here, actually, there's Vice did a really good article on this 9 years ago. And what's funny is a lot of the things they reported on still pretty accurate. So it's definitely worth checking out. Kentucky's whiskey fungus problem is out of control is the name of the article. It's on Vice's website. It's a good read because it really gives a different perspective on it. Obviously, it's not as up to date as the stuff we're talking about here in Lincoln County, but other places where they've had these distilleries, basically encountering the same issues.
Well, and we talk about all these communities making sacrifices to try and bring businesses into town, but sometimes these are the types of stories, and I feel like this is an Anna angle. These are the types of stories that really give manufacturing a black eye, because they want to be seen as clean. They want to be seen as job creators, as economic stimulators. And then you get a job where it's like, it turned the town black, And it's just not good, not a good look for the industry. All right. Well, before we move on to, in case you missed it, the stories that maybe weren't as popular on the website, but still stand to make a big impact on the industry going forward, we have another word from our sponsor, Bright Machines.
Manufacturing is long overdue for an overhaul. Transformation will commence in 3. Redesigning for intelligent automation. Deploying software-first solutions. 2. Driving continuous improvement. 1. Flexibility. Scalability. Resilience. Factory transformation complete. Bright Machines. Let the new era of manufacturing begin.
And we're back, and we like to appreciate everyone that's joining us in the live chat, especially Dan's adamant support for Elon Musk. Thank you for joining us, Dan. We're going to try to get to some more of those comments a little bit later. Now, Bright Machines is a manufacturing technology company pioneering intelligent, software-defined automation for electronics assembly. It leverages a full-stack approach to fundamentally change the flexibility, scalability, and economics of production. Bright Machines is reimagining how products can be designed and produced to address the realities of today and the future ahead. To learn more, once again, I encourage you to go to brightmachines.com/contact us. Let them know that the Today in Manufacturing podcast sent you. Well, let's move on to In Case You Missed It. Jeff, what is a story that maybe wasn't as popular on the site, but could impact the industry quite a bit going forward?
So the story I picked was VW refuses to enable vehicle tracking after SUV is stolen with a child inside. Now, we've seen these stories before where unfortunately there's a small child in the vehicle. It's stolen. Thieves take off with it. They don't realize the kid is in there. And there's a lot of obviously concern and drama over recovering the child. The vehicle becomes very secondary at that point. One of the things that was done in this instance is this woman in Chicago called up VW. She had an Atlas that was stolen, same situation, 2-year-old's inside. She said, hey, can you turn on the GPS tracking?
Yeah.
They did not have this enabled. This was not a feature that she had bought. It's $150. They'd let it expire from the free trial. And VW said, nah.
Yeah. Or they said, yeah, give us $150.
Or they wanted $150 to do it. Now, eventually, law enforcement got involved, and basically, they didn't need the GPS. Law enforcement intervened. They found the vehicle. They found the child. Everything was good. And then VW did do the right thing by basically stepping in and saying, hey, not only did we screw up, but we're going to give you this free for like 5 years.
Yeah.
And we're going to make sure our people are better trained in these situations to support law enforcement in these types of efforts. Why I wanted to bring this up is this isn't really a technology issue. This isn't a VW thing. This is a culture thing. This is a management thing. Whenever we talk about safety, whenever we talk about operational efficiencies, what it really comes down to in a lot of cases is do the right thing.
Yeah.
Employees should be empowered to do the right thing. That shouldn't be something, there should be any protocols. There shouldn't be any, hey, let me ask my manager. We can't do that unless you pay for it. No, that in this instance, this individual who was on the other end of the phone should have just simply known, yes, boom, touch the button, let's go.
Yeah.
That's not that individual's fault. That is whoever is managing that call center. So at the end of the day, it's VW's fault.
Yeah.
And it's a management issue. I still go back to my last commander I had when I was in the Army. I did not like him. He was a battalion commander. I disagreed with him. I didn't care for his style. But I respected him because his biggest thing that he always reinforced was do the right thing for your troops, okay? Whatever you think that is, do the right thing. And if you come and tell me you did it because it benefited or you were thinking of other people and doing the right thing, we're not going to have a problem. And that's what he was doing. Even though this battalion commander made decisions I'll disagree with to this day, I can respect where he was coming from. And that permeated throughout our entire battalion. When we were, as leaders, taking care of our soldiers in the field, we knew that we had to do the right thing by them. Same thing here. Same thing throughout manufacturing, especially with a lot of these like safety issues when we talk about them.
Yeah.
It starts with culture. It starts with empowering employees to, again, not to beat this over the head, simply do the right thing.
What was it about his style that rubbed you the wrong way?
He always talked about doing things the right way, but he did not have what I felt. Okay, and others would disagree, but did not have an awareness of what our mission really was.
Okay.
Did not really appreciate we were a training battalion and what we needed to do to execute that. We were not a combat arms unit, which trains differently than a training unit would. So the needs of the soldiers are different.
Okay. Back to the VW story. It sounded to me like there's a person in a call center with a script, and he didn't have a tab for this. You know, when you have these call centers and all they're doing is working off a script, you need to have like the red tab, right? Like the in case of emergency, just do anything. Andy, another thing that kind of struck me was that we are moving towards an a la carte feature approach to automotive manufacturing in the automotive feature industry. And we're going to see more things like this. I mean, even talking about the stories last week regarding Ford wanting to repossess vehicles, as we have this a la carte approach to features, we are going to see more and more of this.
Yeah. And this is an unusual confluence of events had to happen for this to take place. I certainly will see more of people letting their free trials of whatever expire as automakers try to figure out how to operate in the new mobility ecosystem, or however they're phrasing it these days. This one seems unusual, but it's hopefully can be a good kind of object lesson for not just VW, but everybody who runs customer service or a call center or anything, to let your employees have a little bit of discretion to use common sense. Now, I mean, the other thing is that probably too much in society as a whole, where we're worried about getting ripped off at the expense of, I mean, this company was worried about, VW was worried about $150.
Yeah.
And as a result of worrying about that $150, now they've just got dragged through the media for basically putting this kid's life in danger.
Yeah.
Maybe. So, I mean, it's just, you got to worry about the right things.
Yeah. It's like the airline industry. Whenever somebody says that they're traveling as a result of an emergency, a medical emergency or death, the airline lets you on the plane, they give you the discount, and then they ask for the proof later.
Call it the cost of doing business.
Yeah.
And the cost of avoiding something like this.
Yeah. Jeff, anything else regarding the situation? One thing that also stuck out to me was, here, we're going to give you 5 years of it for free. And hopefully she was like, well, I hope it doesn't happen again.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Andy, what's your in case you missed it this week?
Switching to air travel succinctly there.
Nice segue.
The Federal Aviation Administration this week announced that it had outfitted 43 major airports in the U.S. with a system that features software to predict when a plane appears to be preparing to land on a taxiway instead of a runway. Now, this was sparked by an incident in 2017 at San Francisco's airport. An Air Canada jet was landing at night and was all set to land on a taxiway on the wrong part of the airport. There were 4 other planes lined up there, and it could have been a complete nightmare disaster scenario. So after that, the FAA, in their investigation, decided to deploy this software. And what it does is the software basically predicts when they're lined up wrong and will send an alert to air traffic control. Now, the FAA does say it's still considering whether to have a similar alert for pilots, which may seem counterintuitive and that it may be better to alert the pilots first. The report noted that there's other equipment, of course, on commercial planes to assist with runway lineup. It should also be noted that mistaking a taxiway for a runway was not the issue in a pair of recent near misses in Austin, Texas, and at JFK in New York, if that makes anyone sleep easier.
I just am astonished with how many times a new feature or new technology is announced, and you're like, that doesn't exist yet? Like the plane should have the ability to be like, this is not right, and it should alert pilots. It's like, that's still under development. That seems like it's just another button.
I can't imagine how many layers, and maybe there aren't, and that's even more terrifying, but how many layers there are to distinguish taxiways and runways. Now, maybe they flip them. Maybe it's, I don't know.
Yeah.
I am just completely throwing stuff at the wall here.
Yeah. No, but it's that was a really interesting story. And Jeff, really anything that makes aviation safer, I mean, sometimes, I guess maybe it's shocking, but sometimes a lot of those planes that are still in service are pretty old and don't necessarily get upgraded through the years.
Yeah, and I think the point that Andy made about keeping the pilots in the loop, I mean, at the end of the day, they're still the ones in control. I mean, there's a lot of autonomous technology, you know, with a lot of these bigger planes, but still, them knowing about the technology, understanding how it works, where it can be applied, obviously a big deal. Kind of something that may have been overlooked here that we need to keep in mind, not just with planes, but anytime we have that type of autonomous capability.
Oh, right. In case you missed it this week, inflatable tanks inside the company that makes Decoy Armaments. Inflatech is a Czech company that makes more than 30 different inflatable military decoys. We're talking tanks, aircraft, even howitzers. They won't say if they're being used in the Ukrainian war, but they did say that their business has gone up about 30% in the last year. So it's looking promising. The company expects double-figure growth over the next 3 to 5 years. And that's the kind of stat that just really makes you take a hard look at where we're at as a world. That we're going to see double-figure growth in the next 3 to 5 years for Decoy Armaments. Like, be better. Inflatech manufactures up to 50 decoys a month and has sold them all over the world. The fake tank, as an example, only weighs about 220 pounds and can be set up in 10 minutes. All of this is in the name of fooling the enemy, deceiving cameras, thermal cameras, and radar to make them believe that they've found a valuable target and essentially trading an expensive missile for a pretty cheap decoy. Again, it's innovative, but sad in many ways. These decoys cost about $100,000 each. Sidewinder missiles, which seem about the least expensive, still run about $440,000 per missile. And that was in the news recently because if you remember, we were blasting stuff out of the sky. We were blasting balloons out of the sky with $440,000 missiles. However, for these hypersonic missiles, they can get up to $15 million each. So when you're talking about, trading economically, like if you're taking down a $15 million missile for a $100,000 fake tank, apparently that's a win, but it's still a hole. The owner says that he would prefer to make toys for kids. But first, quote, we have to secure a safe world for them. And yes, I just wanted to pull out the story for a number of reasons. One, it's a cool innovation that was created probably because a guy was making inflatable bouncy houses and realized he could use them to create inflatable decoys. It's also a sad sign of the times that we need this sort of innovation. But, war breeds innovation, unfortunately. And I just want to agree with them that, you know what, I prefer that Inflate Tech is able to make kids' toys as well, and hopefully could do that sooner than later. But I mean, if you're making $50 a month at $100,000 a pop, it's going to be hard to see that kind of return on kids' toys.
I think you're missing the biggest advantage here. First of all, these have been around since World War II. So there was a big part of the landing at Normandy. They used some decoys. And actually, I read a great book, I think I've mentioned before here, called Ghost Army, that talked about a core of artists and actors that use these inflatables to help fool the German army. And the biggest takeaway from the use of these inflatables is the lives they save.
Okay.
Because basically you're creating a false target, a false battlefield. And if they're working, then they will hit these things as opposed to the real thing.
Right.
The other thing is it helps to avoid battles in a lot of instances because it looks like the buildup in a certain area is much greater than it is. So I think the other way you can look at this, and I know you're saying it's unfortunate that there's any war that we would need to deceive people with these types of things. I understand that, but I don't know if it's bigger picture or smaller picture, whichever way you want to go.
No, it's just the really other side of the argument.
It's a life-saving tool here for what they're able to do.
No, and I agree with you. If I didn't express that, I certainly agree with that point, that if it is keeping people safer and avoiding ground level conflict, that is a win. Mine was just overarching, a bummer that it has to exist. But still, Andy, I don't know if you had a chance to look at the photos of some of these. It's kind of impressive that they're able to make so many of them. They're able to set them up in 10 minutes and how effective they are.
Yeah, you stole my whole comment. Sorry.
Sorry.
That you could, I mean, you really should look at the pictures in the article. They're amazing that you could inflate these in 10 minutes and they look like that. It's incredible. And they can fool, not just somebody walking around, but, military technology, that whatever Russia may or may not be deploying, if that's where these may or may not be. But you're right. The 3 to 5 year window is a little sobering. So yeah, I hope he gets to go back to making kids' toys. So
yeah,
here's hoping.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to our final thoughts before we get out of here this week. Andy, what's your final thought this week?
This is going to sound a little bit like a brag, but not really. I filed my taxes this week.
All right.
And I don't know what you guys use, but I use TurboTax, even though they started charging me however many years ago. This year, I don't recall, and taxes are like, for me to retain any sort of knowledge whatsoever, I have to do it more than once a year because everything just goes out the window. So I don't know if this had happened before. But this year, I noticed that and you'll have to remind me next year if I bring up the same thing, but they had something, I believe, called race car mode.
Okay.
And I don't know if I clicked into it by accident or what, but it gives you, like, we based on your W-2, whatever, we think you'll be able to do your taxes in 1 hour or 20 minutes, whatever.
Yeah.
I am not an accountant. So for the good people at Intuit, when you are dealing with something as anxiety-inducing as your complicated financial documents, maybe don't put a stopwatch up there.
We bet you can't beat it.
That's right.
I bet you can't do it in 80 minutes or less.
You know what the sad thing is? They were dead on.
Oh, man.
Wow.
That's crazy.
It's nuts. But I didn't care for it.
Yeah. I use, I have to go to a person and hand over the documents.
That's
and
what I should do.
Put my trust in them because I filed my own taxes as long as I was just single. But once it started getting more complicated with a family and homes, and then homes that were maybe taken away, and then new homes. I just wanted to entrust somebody that, like you said, is kind of doing it every day, all day for
100%.
A quarter.
I should get an accountant.
Yeah. Well, and it's also, but I mean, I don't walk into that door until noon on the last day. Just like, hey, do you have an opening?
April 14. Here we go.
But my final thought this week is just, a lot of times I like to stress, getting out there and trying new things. So this week we tried some new things in the office, and we tried. We ran a story in food manufacturing. Andy, you ran it about a company that's doing cricket flavored ice cream.
A German company. You have your ice cream companies in every country, it seems like, just trying to push the envelope on flavors. So this was a German company that made basically. You should look at those photos too. They're it's cricket ice cream. You can't tell it's cricket ice cream until they put the little dried cricket on top of the ice cream at the end.
Yeah.
So,
and it made a couple of us in the office think, I've never eaten bugs before. And
a couple of us,
yeah. Not many, not as many as I thought would be on board. But it's also weirdly easy to procure bug snacks online. It's the new world. But we tried mixed bugs, which were just dehydrated crickets, grasshoppers, grubs, and other bugs. And we also tried chocolate-covered crickets. And to that, I want to say it's good to try new things. But man, are they not all winners. And no one needs to rush out eating bugs. Like, if anything, it was reaffirming that in the event of some sort of apocalyptic landscape, I know that I could turn over a log and kind of sustain myself and be like, yeah, it's not as bad as I remember. But mixed bugs, which are just dehydrated bugs, are a hard pass. It reminded me of, as a kid, when you're playing, when we'd be playing on my dad's farm and like my brother would tackle me and you eat a little bit of dirt. It was that taste where you're just like, it's kind of gritty and it's kind of flavorless. I kind of don't like it. But I also have to give props to everyone in the office that tried them. Producer Eric and Alex, Ben, who's been on the program. And we have a new addition to the Mnet, manufacturing.net and IN family. So not only introducing Will, but Will Kanan on his first, or is his second day?
I think it was second.
His second day, we're just kind of passing around 2 bowls of chocolate-covered crickets and mixed bugs. And he goes in, because it's like, I don't know if he has a choice. He goes in and just pulls the biggest bug out of there. Like potato chip-sized bug, and just not even flinching, throws it in. He's like, and walks away. I'm like, he's going to make it. He's going to make it. And you would think that the chocolate-covered cricket is good, but it's, you taste the chocolate, and then you bite into the cricket, and you're like, oh, yeah. There's the dead thing in the middle of the chocolate. So good to push the boundaries, but sometimes they don't always pan out.
I wish I had known that, 1, I was going to be on the podcast, and 2, we were doing this bit, because I would have probably forced myself to try one instead of admitting my cowardice in front of the world here.
But it's not cowardice.
I don't know.
So it was like double bagged, right? So like we opened the one bag, and then there's the tinier bag, and when you pull it out, it looked like bait.
It was very much an Arrested Development joke, like, oh, well, I don't know what I expected.
Yeah.
Like, those are just bugs.
Yeah. And even though I like that the ingredients include the individual bugs and then salt, which it could have used. It could have used a lot more of. But no, it was at least with the chocolate covered cricket, they were just little balls of chocolate. Those were a lot easier to get your head around. Mm-hmm. That one, you're just like, it is a winged item, winged bug, and it's crispy.
I was thinking about it later.
Yeah.
It's just the whole organism. Like if it was like grasshopper wings or legs or something.
So that's the part
I feel like
that'd
be more appetizing. I don't know. Maybe.
Oh, okay.
I was just thinking about it later on.
Yeah.
In wallowing in my cowardice.
I think the one that was the hardest for me to get my head around were the grubs, because those were the ones that still looked like thick and plump. And even though like you bit into it and it was like a flavorless pork rind, for lack of a better term, like that was the one where I was just like, that looks juicy. Mm-hmm. Jeff, did you try the bugs?
I didn't. You guys, I was right in the middle of something when you guys were doing it, and I did not seek them out, I guess.
Yeah.
I did not like intentionally stay away from them. I just like didn't circle back to it.
No, it was, we have more.
I would have tried the chocolate ones if I'd have thought about it. I just didn't get there.
Yeah, there wasn't a run on them, like if you've noticed, like we have the free snack bar or whatever in the office, and the Girl Scout cookies and chips have come and gone. The Cheetos that Mitzi doesn't eat because he's a monster, those have come and gone. But yeah, the crickets and mixed bugs have kind of Like I've been eating 2 a day because I'm like, what else am I gonna do with these? Like,
You can throw them away.
put them in my like prepper box. It's just I've got a bunch of cream of mushroom soup and mixed bugs.
There's probably some birds outside that would take them.
Oh, okay, that could be fun. Just do some bird watching at lunch.
Sure.
We watch the birds spit them out. We like live ones. These are gross.
More salt.
Yeah. So I guess Seth, who's watching us live, it's good to hear from you, Seth. He says grasshopper tenderloins.
There you go.
I mean,
That's what he's talking about.
So apparently in Seattle, they like sell ones that are like marinated. I don't know. They were so bad, it almost made me interested to try other ones. Because I'm like, some of them have to be good.
You've tasted the worst, so
Yeah.
now you got to see where we go from here.
Exactly.
Okay.
Jeff, what's your final thought this week?
Final thought is I was reminded this week what a lucky person I am.
Oh, okay.
Obviously, great place to work, but also great at home. And that's because of my wonderful wife of 12 years. Yes, 12 years. And she is celebrating a birthday this weekend. So we're going to celebrate her, and I just want to let her know, because she actually does listen, how grateful we are. And she does kind of likes to downplay her birthday, but it's important to everybody else to celebrate somebody as important as she is and everything she does for us. So happy birthday.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's my final thought.
Yeah, that's a good final thought.
Podcast poll.
Oh, yeah.
Had some interesting feedback.
Okay.
The question from last week was which of the following stories were a bigger surprise? Okay. So one of them dealt with GM sort of idling that facility because they all of a sudden found themselves with an over quantity of vehicles. Sky wrote in, said, last year or two, you could not find a GM truck for sale. Now there's more than enough. The surprising element is no reduction in price or help with incentives. GM and other car truck dealers better wake up and smell the high interest rates. That's a great call.
Yeah.
Interesting perspective. The last ones here, these other responses, all kind of echoed the same sentiment towards, remember, Ford came out with the patent for basically the technology for repossessing vehicles. There were some other elements to it, but that seemed to be what they really pushed.
Yeah.
Was that if you didn't pay for your new truck, they could autonomously have it delivered to the impound lot.
Yeah.
Jack wrote in, he said, this is insane. If Ford were in my purchase plans, this would cause me to reconsider. And I think that's fair. It's interesting fallout. Al said, all of the events seemed reasonable. The one that is a head scratcher is Ford. Why would Ford ponder that this would somehow be a moneymaker? The alienation risks with Ford customers that are conspiracy theorists could not be trivial for them to factor into this. It's just a patent. They may never deploy it, but I fail to see how they can make money from it.
Yeah. It is a patent. So rename it. The Ford vehicle recovery patent, not the Ford repossession patent.
So, and a lot of comments were similar. So this was far and away. And I thought actually, some of the others that we had in there was like the overtime pay granted for a $200,000 employee. I thought that might get a little bit more response. But overwhelmingly, the podcast poll winner was Ford filing a patent for these repossession capabilities. So,
okay.
One side note, I know I owe people some T-shirts. We are out.
Yeah.
So if I owe you a T-shirt, let me know. I will get it to you. We're just restocking. Also, I think we're going to try to do some can koozies.
That's right.
Not cozies.
Yeah.
I called them a can cozy and was just, almost banished to the ends of the office. Just people cannot believe my faux pas.
The koozie keeps the can cozy.
Yeah, ridiculous, I guess, on my part for calling it a cozy. But it's a koozie. So we're coming out with some Today Manufacturing can koozies.
Do you have another question for today?
We do. The Scout thing kind of got me thinking and inspired the polling question. So we've talked about a lot of these vehicles coming back. Mm-hmm. You're championing the Gremlin.
The Gremlin.
I think you also were one who's trying to defend the Datsun when we covered that shutting down a couple months ago.
Nah, I wouldn't defend it. Or maybe I was I'm pro EV DeLorean.
Okay.
Definitely.
Well, which of the following comebacks are you rooting for the most? The DeLorean. Oh. We've got a couple different options there, but we'll just keep that under the DeLorean as one heading. The Scout, which would definitely get my vote. Hummer, also come with the EV Hummer. We talked about the Volkswagen Microbus. They're trying to resurrect that as an EV as well.
Yeah.
The Bronco, I'm going to throw that one on there, even though it's been out a couple years. I think it's still worth taking a look at. And the last one is one that's actually coming out. I believe it's either next model year or 2025. But Dodge is bringing back the Dakota pickup. It's actually going to be a Ram Dakota, but it looks awesome.
Yeah.
So those are the options. Which of the following comebacks are you rooting for the most? The DeLorean, the Scout, the Hummer, the VW Microbus, the Bronco, or the Ram Dakota? Let us know.
Can we add a write-in? I want to do a write-in campaign for the Gremlin.
No. They're not bringing it back. It's not actually being brought back.
You got to generate the heat. We got also,
That'll be next week's poll. Which really awful car?
If
do
we
you
get
want to see
enough write-in
resurrected?
votes for the Gremlin, I will do a whole segment on why it should not be brought back.
Yes, do it for me. Do it
Be
for
like
me and
a
the good of the podcast.
bonus episode.
And also that VW Microbus, you're being way too kind because they renamed that the like ID.buzz.
Yeah, I know.
And it's just,
Nobody knows that. Nobody's gonna think that. So
do you want to champion the ID.buzz? All right. Well, we got one more comment from Dan before we get out of here. He said, had a friend that was an engineering professor.
Entomology.
Oh, entomology. Okay. Showed up first day of class in a cockroach costume and handed out bugs to eat.
it's hardcore.
Memorable. I mean, that's a memorable class.
That's hardcore.
Man, was it cockroaches? Whew.
Oh, man. Right? So was his message, eat me?
Well, he just handed out bugs. He didn't hand out cockroaches, right?
I don't know.
He dressed up as a cockroach to hand out other bugs.
Maybe.
Dan, help us out. Was it a cockroach? And did you eat it? Also, Anna, we hope you get well soon.
Yes.
Hope to see you next week. But, a little rest and recovery. Push those fluids. All right. Well, before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach any of us at Jeff, David, or Andy at in.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can reach Anna at in.com and say get well soon. If you want to subscribe to our daily and weekly newsletters, you can make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. And please subscribe to us on YouTube at IEN Magazine so you can join us live like Dan and we can learn more about your trials and tribulations through college, like a teacher that dressed up like a bug and asked you to eat bugs on the first day. All right, well, for Jeff Ranke and Andy Zoll, I'm David Manti. This is the Today in Manufacturing podcast, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Today in Manufacturing podcast.